The story began on a bright morning when a young woman named Amara boarded her flight from Los Angeles to New York. She looked calm and elegant, wearing a sleek black pantsuit and carrying a designer handbag. To everyone else, she seemed like just another traveler, but few knew that she was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the tech industry. As she approached her seat in the first-class section, she noticed an older man already sitting there, reading a newspaper. Amara smiled politely and said, "Excuse me, sir, I think this is my seat." The man glanced up briefly, then returned to his paper without moving. "I think you're mistaken," he muttered, his tone dismissive. Passengers nearby began to watch, sensing tension brewing. Amara calmly pulled out her ticket and double-checked the seat number, her confidence unshaken despite the man's rude tone. The flight attendant arrived, sensing the growing discomfort in the cabin. "Is there a problem?" she asked gently. Amara explained the situation, showing her boarding pass. The attendant turned toward the man, asking to see his ticket. He scoffed and said, "You people always make things difficult," before reluctantly handing it over. The attendant's face turned serious as she realized he was indeed in the wrong seat. "Sir, this seat belongs to her," she said politely. But instead of apologizing, the man crossed his arms and said, "I've already settled in. She can sit somewhere else." The passengers nearby murmured in shock. Amara's calmness did not waver. "I paid for this seat just like everyone else," she said firmly. The attendant tried to de-escalate, but the man refused to move, growing louder with every word. The situation began to spiral. The attendant signaled for a supervisor, while Amara stood quietly, refusing to be intimidated. The older man continued his protest, claiming he was more deserving of the seat. "You can't expect me to move for some young girl who probably got an upgrade," he snapped. The passengers' faces turned toward him in disbelief. Amara simply looked at him and said, "You have no idea who you're talking to, sir." Her tone wasn't arrogant. It was composed and steady, carrying the weight of someone used to being underestimated. A nearby passenger, a businessman, whispered to another, recognizing her from a recent magazine cover. "That's Amara Lawson," he said, eyes widening. "She owns Lawson Tech." Slowly, murmurs began spreading through the cabin, shifting the atmosphere completely. The flight crew, now joined by the captain, approached to assess the disturbance. The older man seemed unfazed, confident that his entitlement would protect him. "I'm not moving," he said firmly. "This seat should go to someone important." The captain, maintaining professionalism, replied, "Sir, all passengers are required to sit in their assigned seats." Still, the man remained seated, muttering under his breath. Amara finally took a small breath and said, "It's fine. I'll wait for this to be resolved properly." Her grace under pressure drew silent admiration from other passengers. The captain gave the man one final warning, but when he continued to refuse, the captain made the call that no one expected. The flight would be delayed until security arrived. As minutes passed, the air in the cabin grew tense. People began checking their watches, frustrated but curious. The flight attendants offered apologies to the other passengers, explaining that procedures had to be followed. Amara remained quiet, gazing out the window, her face serene but thoughtful. The older man grumbled, calling the situation ridiculous, but his confidence began to fade as he realized everyone was staring at him disapprovingly. One passenger recorded the event discreetly, sensing it would go viral. The whispers grew louder as more people recognized Amara's face. A woman seated nearby said softly, "That's the billionaire who built education programs for underprivileged kids." Slowly, the man's arrogance began to crumble, though he tried to hide it behind nervous laughter. 10 minutes later, 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. The captain explained the situation, and they asked the man to step aside. He resisted at first, claiming he was being treated unfairly, but the officers stood firm. Amara remained calm, hands folded on her lap, saying nothing. Finally, the man stood up, muttering something about respect as the officers escorted him out. The passengers exhaled in relief. The captain apologized to Amara for the trouble, assuring her that the situation would be handled properly. She smiled faintly and replied, "It's all right. Sometimes patience speaks louder than anger." The captain nodded respectfully, impressed by her composure. The flight attendants quickly helped her settle into her rightful seat, as the cabin filled with quiet admiration. Just as the crew prepared for takeoff, a new issue arose. The captain received a message from ground control. The man who had been removed was a frequent flyer with connections to the airline's board. The flight couldn't depart until further clearance was given. The passengers groaned in frustration. Amara, however, remained still, scrolling through her phone. Moments later, she made a quiet call. "Hi, Daniel," she said calmly. "Yes, I'm on the flight to New York. There's been a bit of an incident with your airline partner." Within minutes, things shifted. A message came through to the captain from headquarters. Full cooperation was requested for passenger Amara Lawson. The delay suddenly took on a different meaning. As the plane waited on the tarmac, whispers spread among the passengers. Someone overheard a flight attendant mention that the CEO of Lawson Tech had just been identified on board. Shock rippled through the cabin as people realized who Amara really was. A few even apologized to her for how she had been treated. She simply smiled, saying, "No harm done. It's better when people show you who they are early." The atmosphere softened. Meanwhile, the grounded flight caused a buzz on social media as clips from passengers began circulating online. Within an hour, the story of the billionaire girl whose seat was stolen had spread across platforms, gathering millions of views. Back in the terminal, airline executives scrambled to respond. The man who had refused to give up his seat was now being questioned, visibly embarrassed. Reporters began calling for statements. On board, Amara remained silent, her demeanor calm but reflective. The captain returned, informing her that the flight was cleared for takeoff, and she thanked him sincerely. As the plane finally lifted off the ground, the passengers gave her a quiet round of applause. She nodded modestly, looking out the window as the city disappeared below. To her, it wasn't about the attention, it was about dignity. When the flight landed in New York, Amara was greeted by her team waiting at the gate. As she walked out, messages of support flooded her phone. The incident had become a symbol of quiet strength and grace under pressure. Later that evening, Amara posted a short message on social media. Power isn't about wealth or fame, it's about self-respect. The post went viral, inspiring thousands of comments from people who had faced similar moments of prejudice. Meanwhile, the airline issued a public apology and offered to donate to Amara's foundation. She accepted, but only on the condition that it would fund scholarships for young travelers. What began as an act of disrespect ended as a powerful reminder that true power needs no introduction, only integrity. Days after the flight incident, Amara's story dominated every news outlet, but she avoided interviews, letting her silence speak volumes. The video of the confrontation had surpassed 100 million views, sparking global debates about equality, privilege, and grace under pressure. Talk shows discussed her poise, while social media praised her patience. Meanwhile, the airline board reached out privately, offering her lifetime platinum status as an apology. Amara politely declined, saying she preferred fairness over favors. When a reporter finally caught up with her outside her Manhattan office, she simply said, "I wasn't fighting for a seat. I was standing for respect." The moment was captured on camera, her calm smile under the city lights becoming an image of quiet power. By nightfall, her foundation's website crashed under the weight of donations, as millions felt moved by her humility and Kunenli integrity. Weeks passed, and Amara's life slowly returned to normal, yet the memory of that day followed her everywhere. Invitations poured in from universities, business forums, and advocacy groups, wanting her to speak about dignity and equality. But Amara chose her appearances carefully, always reminding audiences that true power lies not in anger, but in composure. On one occasion, she stood before a hall full of young women saying softly, "The world will test your grace. Don't let it steal your peace." Her words struck deeply, drawing standing ovations. Even those who had mocked her online later admitted that her calm response had changed the tone of a global conversation. For Amara, that moment on the plane wasn't just a humiliation. It became her platform to show what real strength looks like when pride meets patience. Months later, Amara was invited to an international leadership summit in Geneva. When she arrived, Journalists flooded the entrance, calling her name, asking questions about the infamous flight. But she only smiled and said, "That flight may have been grounded, but it taught the world how to rise." Inside, as she addressed the audience, her poise and clarity left the entire hall silent. "Respect," she said, "isn't something you demand, but something you reflect." Her words resonated deeply, especially among young professionals from around the world who saw her as a new voice of calm defiance and confidence. One quiet evening, Amara sat alone at her office window, sipping tea as the city lights shimmered below. She thought about the old man who had helped her board the flight that day, the flight attendants who later reached out to apologize, and even the woman who had taken her seat. Instead of bitterness, she felt gratitude. "Everyone is fighting a battle we can't see," she murmured. Maybe she was too. That compassion, that ability to forgive without forgetting, became the reason people admired her far beyond the viral fame. She wasn't just a symbol of power. She was a reminder of humanity in an often harsh world. The airline industry soon introduced new guidelines inspired by Amara's experience, emphasizing fair treatment and emotional awareness. Executives reached out privately to thank her for setting a global example of dignity. When asked if she planned to sue, she laughed softly and replied, "You can't sue ignorance. You can only educate it." That quote spread across social media, engraved on posters, quoted in classrooms, and printed on magazines. Amara had unknowingly started a movement, not through protest, but through patience. By the following year, Amara's foundation, which she had established quietly after the incident, was funding scholarships for underprivileged youth and travel programs, promoting cultural understanding. Every donation letter began the same way, because one woman stayed calm. At a gala event honoring her, she stood on stage in an elegant white gown, humbled by the standing ovation. Her speech was simple yet powerful. "I didn't want to prove anyone wrong. I wanted to prove what's right still matters." The crowd erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. For the first time, Amara felt the full weight of how one act of restraint had rippled through the world. Years later, on a quiet flight home, Amara was once again seated by the window. A young flight attendant recognized her and whispered, "You're the reason I work here now." Amara smiled warmly, eyes reflecting the soft sunset outside. As the plane took off, she thought back to that day, the humiliation, the anger, the choice she made to stay composed. She realized it was never about the seat. It was about showing the world that respect has no class, no color, and no price. As the clouds parted and light poured through, she whispered to herself, "Sometimes life grounds us, just to help us take off higher."